All right, this is SIG Auth for August 22nd, 2018. We'll go ahead and jump into the agenda. Just a couple announcements to begin with. One is a reminder that Code Slush is next Tuesday, which is 28th. That means that at that point, only things specifically targeted at 112 will be allowed to merge. And that will continue for another week until code freeze, which is scheduled for September 4th, at which point only bug fixes and release blockers, bug fixes that are release blockers will be allowed to merge. So let's get reviews wrapped up. The second announcement is that the pull request enumerating subprojects for SIG Auth got opened against the community repo. Thanks, Mike, for opening that. It's in progress. There's a little bit of cleanup we need to do to kind of tie together owners files and things for components that are spread across a few different packages. So we're still working on that as we have time, probably after code freeze. But if you want to take a look at the projects that are called out there, and any feedback is welcome on that. I saw a few requests come in for the agenda doc. That doc is actually shared with the Kubernetes dev mailing list and the Kubernetes SIG Auth mailing lists. So if you are on either of those, you should have access to that. So, and both of those should be able to be joined without any approval. Anyone can join those. Yep, so join Kubernetes dev and or Kubernetes SIG Auth. All right, were there other announcements before we jump into some of the discussion items? All right. The first discussion item was the image review API. Oh, you know what? Let me share my screen. Sorry about that. The image review API change. I don't see Wilfred on. Is someone else able to talk to this, or does anyone know what this was about?
Hey, it's great. Wilfred's trying to join, just having some trouble. I'll try and help him out. Do we want to just go to the next thing, and we'll come back to this one?
Sure. Sure. All right. The next item was the SAFE working group topic. So I'm not sure if
I'm here.
Okay,
this
great.
is Sarah Allen. I joined Kubernetes SIG Auth, but that doesn't seem to give me permission.
Oh, really?
But now you're projecting, so that's fine.
Okay.
Did
you want to share, or
yeah,
do you want me to open up? Okay.
I can share my screen and tell you a little bit about the SAFE working group. Where's the screen share? Share screen. So, we have a working group that has been meeting since, so you can see that we have a proposal to be a CNCF working group, but we are not currently. You could find us at, cn-security/safe. We grew out of a number of us who were working on specific software to do security and policy for cloud native applications or deployments, and turns out that you can't do security in isolation. You need to have a secure system that involves all the components. And so we really kicked off at KubeCon last December and have been meeting, and you can see that in our repo we have a lot of different meeting minutes, and we have taken the approach of pulling in people from the ecosystem, different stakeholders who are contributing to this way or are facing security problems in determining secure access. And so we've been meeting for about 6 months, and now we have a proposal to CNCF, which Ken Owens is sponsoring. So I'll start, we've worked really hard on this objective, which is really trying to illustrate or articulate this cross-cutting concern of security. To have a cloud-native deployment that is secure, you need to consider a number of things. And so we're specifically looking at secure access policy and safety, which is safety is a really broad word, but we feel that it is bracketed by saying this is a concern. We're looking at the concerns for operators, administrators, developers, and end users across the cloud native ecosystem. So if somebody is trying to do something cloud native and that has these concerns, then that's in the domain of our group. It's not all security things, it's not all policy things, it's not all safety things, but particularly where you need to solve problems in order to move forward in a cloud native way, right? So we have like our goals are really, the other key point is there was a group which was had proposed a policy working group, and we've decided to merge. So I believe the Kubernetes SIG around policy had proposed a CNCF policy working group, and we've merged those efforts so that SAFE considers policy, and they agree that this kind of framing of policy makes sense for what their concerns are. And our goal is really to have to be inclusive of the concerns that come from SIG Auth and the policy SIG, and but that what we're looking at is the concerns that cross Kubernetes and other technologies that may be not Kubernetes. And so what we're seeking for, and Tim has joined our meetings, and we've had different people who cross the meetings between SIG Auth and SAFE. And ideally, you all are focused on Kubernetes auth concerns, and then where we can feed you information about maybe what we're discovering from users of Kubernetes, or where people might be, having interoperability challenges with Kubernetes, or, validate that these problems are being solved, across different technologies. And then if you have particular concerns, to bring them to us, and, we could collaborate potentially. At least we'd be interested in collaborating on specific challenges. So, so we've committed to delivering a couple of white papers, something we call the key elements of a trustworthy system, which is like, how do we think about something being trustworthy? Because there are a lot of people who are newcomers to this space who are coming from on-prem systems, and the traditional way of securing on-prem systems, it doesn't take advantage of a lot of the cloud native things. And so we want to, sort of up-level what we worry about in terms of system security, so that we can translate it into cloud native concepts instead of just replicating giving people additional options, right? So they can replicate some of the traditional concepts, with VPCs and whatever, but then there's also some cloud native concepts which have some advantages. And then articulating a cloud native policy architecture. So how do you, think about policy in a cloud native way, which comes from the policy working group. And the key thing that is really important to our working group is that we're taking this iterative human-centered design process, where we're not saying that we're the experts that are going to dictate how to make a secure system, but that we're going to pull from people outside of our small group to inform our findings, and so that we can reference specific use cases to back up the white papers that we produce. And while we're producing those white papers, if people are interested in these specific use cases, we'll be publishing those artifacts regularly, so we can refer back to them, and so that other people can use them if they so choose. And then there's a bunch of the policy folks are working on container policy interface implementations, and we've volunteered to provide feedback to the TOC on anything that's kind of related to the expertise of our members and to our mission here. And And then, as things come up, there you may recommend specific projects or specifications if we're finding gaps in what's needed. So I'm going to pause and see what questions you all have, because we have a bunch of materials, but I don't know. I didn't actually ask how much time you wanted me to spend. So.
No, that was a good overview. If folks have questions, we have a pretty light agenda today, so we'll give a couple minutes.
I see the name is very similar to SPIFFE in the acronym. I was wondering if there's any ambition to propose APIs for access, or is this more of an exploratory working group at this point?
So we haven't, I think we don't want to jump to the solution, right? So I think that a lot of us believe that there is a need for a way to ask a system questions in a standard way that can determine its security profile. But we also have a lot of very opinionated members who might have some very strong preconceived notions about what those are. And so we're taking the approach of, let's first make sure that we have all the nouns and verbs right, and we are articulating what we're doing so that we can be productive and clearly say, there are these problems and we're proposing a solution for them. Like, for example, particularly in this auth realm, there's where what we found is that there are, as I'm sure you all know, it's sort of obvious once you say it, but it's not necessarily obvious at the beginning of the conversation, is there's different kinds of authorization and authentication. You have service identities, there are workload identities, there are end user identities, and depending on what kind of identity and what types of authorization you're talking about, that leads us down a different path. Of course, all of these things should work together, but understanding what layer of the stack you're working on and what problem you're actually solving kind of helps focus those conversations. And right now, we don't have good, clearly defined categories and language around that. Pardon me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Were there any other questions, feedback people had?
This is Tim Allclair. I just wanted to make a comment. I was the one who kind of suggested that we sync up here. And to me, it looks like there's the safe kind of objectives are very closely aligned with, or it kind of like their mission statement is very closely aligned with the mission statement that we recently laid out in our charter. Ours, of course, is more focused on the specific implementation and things within the Kubernetes domain. But I think it definitely makes sense for us to kind of collaborate closely. And I do think that having the SAFE group provide sort of input on what kind of input coming from the broader ecosystem on ways that, within the Kubernetes ecosystem, we can provide some features, whether it's shortcoming or figure out ways to better integrate with the rest of the ecosystem. I think that would be really valuable. And then I was also going to just propose that we can figure this out offline, but have some sort of kind of regular sync up. I'd be happy to volunteer to be the SIG Auth ambassador to SAFE, or it's open to anyone who wants to join, but kind of get some communication channels open there as well.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Tim. I was going to wait I was going to wait to the end to say that I have a question for you all, which Tim has introduced, which is that you know, like we have some things that we're in the midst of where maybe, you know, like offline, maybe we can propose a format for it, but like to have like a subgroup that includes folks from both groups that works through a particular open question, right? And then we could come up with a statement or guidance or something, right? That is a combined output, right? And we can present it to both groups. And then, you know, and maybe some of the things could be at one of the working group meetings, and some of them could be subgroups that we work through a particular question. So yeah, so basically I wanted to put it out there and like, does that sound interesting? Does this seem like a reasonable approach?
I think it's definitely interesting, especially for something that is trying to identify things that apply across a broad scope. Having a way to kind of contact people who are interested in this area in all of these different projects and say, hey, a question came up about this thing. How do you do it? Have you ever thought about this? Does this apply to you? If it does, how have you solved it? Having a way to do that seems really valuable. I'm curious how you have traditionally gone about kind of gathering feedback from a broad sweep of products. Is it like surveys or like reaching out to people individually that you know, or like how has that been going for you?
Yeah, so basically what we've been doing, which has been very successful so far, is that when like a question comes up, we look for, we use our networks to say, who's somebody who has this problem? And we get them to present to us. Or who's somebody who has a solution in this space? And we get them to present to us. So that we're effectively, like that sort of primary source sharing of the depth of the problem, because there's nuance to it. And then that kind of informs our like writing about it. And then what we have not, like we're working on sort of kind of figuring out how to define roles so that we can more effectively capture this stuff and cough it out. Because like right now, I think we've just grown a knowledge base within the group of who has which expertise. And like one of the things that, if we're adopted into CNCF, one of our ideas is to just kind of sweep through all the projects and, maybe roughly categorize them into, what kinds of concerns, like, these ones have a policy implementation, these ones are a policy solution, these ones, are, like, just kind of put them into some set of categories and then reach out to each one of them. Did we put you in the right bucket, right? And that kind of a thing, I think, will help us all get aligned and know who to talk to about the different things. And so, but we're it's sort of a clearinghouse for use cases, and because I think every one of these open questions, there are many experts who pretty much have an answer that everybody would agree to. But if you don't have that answer easily available to you, then you've got to go down a rat hole, which may get you attached to a solution which isn't quite as good, right? And we're just seeing this happen repeatedly as people, move to the cloud, right? That the gaps in knowledge either just slow them down or can, kind of create divisions where if there was more knowledge about what was going on, then there wouldn't be conflict. And maybe there are some actual conflicts, but so at the beginning, for example, we had a big division of RBAC versus ABAC, right? And through a lot of the presentations, it's sort of clear, I think it's become clear, and we've done some writing about this, but we haven't really finalized it, that actually there are use cases that are appropriate for ABAC. Often ABAC is layered on top of RBAC, so it's not an either or in almost every case. And to actually articulate, these are the specific use cases where ABAC is high value, generally recommended to be on top of an RBAC system, or whatever the right answer is there, and like hash it out, make it clear so that we don't have arbitrary and divisions in the community. And if we can get aligned on those things, I think that would just streamline our work.
Sarah, I'm curious if you think the very broad scope here is a temporary thing or a permanent thing. So it sounded like I could envision it being like we're figuring out where we're going to focus, and then we're going to like laser focus on these things. We're going to stack rank and prioritize and just do these small things. Or like I also heard you mention like a clearinghouse. If you think you're going to stay like that broad scope is actually intentional, and you're going to keep that broad scope like indefinitely.
Well, I think that the broad scope is intentional, right? And our approach is to chart out what are the categories within that broad scope and look at what are the actual problems that operators, administrators, developers are having creating cloud native systems, right? In these are people, is it that this one category is all doing things in different ways and confusing everybody, right? Or is it that these two categories, it's not, there's a category that is not well filled, right? So it's more like clarifying for everybody where it is and then shining a light on where there are things that are causing problems in the ecosystem. But right now, we don't even have that landscape. And we don't even have, there's lots of different ways of articulating security, and most of them are not a cloud native way of articulating security. So that's part of the key elements of a trustworthy system. Like, can we just bucket these security concerns so that we can just, we can be clear about what we're talking about when we have a problem, and then, produce these white papers that can kind of streamline the efforts of the different cloud native projects.
Yeah, I think there's value in kind of identifying or summarizing the different approaches taken by different projects, just so that if you're kind of coming to this area for a new project or trying to add something to an existing project, you don't have to go become an expert in the other 50 CNCF projects to kind of figure out what people are doing. So being able to summarize and say this has worked well, this hasn't worked well, that seems useful.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing is the people who started this group, actually, like most of us, actually have a problem we would like to solve, but we can't solve it without other people. And, for example, I work at Google. In my, one of my sub-teams works closely with OPA and implements attribute-based access control for Firebase. Then there's, IAM and role-based access control, and there, I talked to JJ because I'd met him through the Istio community, and he was like, well, you can't, why are you promoting a policy language? That's not going to create a secure architecture. And I was like, well, of course it's not going to create, I was never saying that a policy language is by in and of itself going to create a secure architecture. And so it's, in order for that project to be successful, the users of it need the context within which it works. And so that's critical for the success of projects that I work on at Google, to have the users of the software understand that the system within which it needs to be deployed and the assumptions by that. And we want this to be used by different systems, and to do that, people have to be making the same assumptions. And it's sort of a way to pull that out and agree on it with each other, because a lot of us end up having to do, in order to figure out how to make our stuff interoperable, it's pairwise with a whole bunch of different vendors or open source projects. And so a number of us were having to do these pairwise, interop discussions. And we were like, well, if we just all talk together, we can streamline this a bit.
Oh, well, I'm talking more with end of September.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah,
All right.
so,
Well, thanks for presenting that. I think, are you looking for feedback on the proposal to CNCF, or just
Well, I think
like if you're interested, join the group and kind of keep up to date with what's going on with it?
Yeah, and I think that you know, Tim, or if any of you would feel comfortable saying like, yes, we believe this proposal is, you know, consistent with having a SIG auth Kubernetes. You know, like, you know, to whatever extent people in the group would feel comfortable chiming in to mention how we think that our different groups are compatible and working together. I think that would help, because people are concerned, like, oh, is this redundant with other groups? And we've tried to write some stuff about that, but if other people wanted to chime in and say, we think so too, that would be helpful.
Yeah,
Sorry,
the broad scope combined with like sort of not advisory, like more informational output is interesting. Normally you kind of want something stronger coming out of a working group, but at the same time, like you said at the beginning, this area is very difficult to kind of be prescriptive in once you get down to actual implementations. So.
Well, I'm not sure that's true of the CNCF working groups, because
Right. Yeah. Jordan. We brought in. Hi, this is Dan Shaw. Sorry, I was double booked and came in a little bit late. So we have Erica, who's also in the policy working group. So the Kubernetes policy working group was going to form a CNCF level policy working group, and we decided to merge our efforts together. And the delta between how the Kubernetes policy working group is operating in an ongoing fashion versus what we're doing at the CNCF is pretty different. They're looking at the PRs, looking at in the Kubernetes working groups. It's all concrete delivery and tracking towards landing stuff, which is fantastic. And in SAFE, we are looking at the cross-cutting concerns and how things come together at the edges, and then sort of stepping back from that, how that all comes together as a coherent picture. So out of necessity, we have to take 10 steps back to really view that perspective, and that colors the kinds of activities that we can be most effective at.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't make sense. It's hard to evaluate kind of like the question about whether this kind of broad scope is a short-term or long-term thing. Like envisioning what this working group will look like kind of once some of the big 10,000 foot view use cases are identified and we kind of agree on terminology. And yeah, like I said, I don't disagree that there are useful things here. It's just a little bit hard to evaluate kind of up front, like what this would look like long term.
Sure.
yeah,
I mean, we are the first working group that's landing post the initial batch. I guess we had the serverless working group that was kind of bootstrapped in after the CI/CD and storage. But in the definition of what the CNCF expects as a working group, we are the first ones to go through the process of defining that and working out the kinks of that system. So the honest reality is CNCF doesn't even know.
Yep.
But I think also in terms of the outcomes, like the idea, like that we would produce specific recommendations, like we think that these next set of things are important to work on. Like after we've done that landscape and the white papers, then we would we'll have a queue of things that we think that would help the cloud native ecosystem in this area, right? And then we'll suggest to the TOC that we'd work on project X or investigate issue Y, and that's really staged that way because we think that we don't want to like pre-assume what those top issues are before we've done the first step. And yeah, you're right. It might look quite different if we're like diving into a specific issue that's under addressed. Kind of like the way the serverless working group is now like almost entirely focused on cloud events.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, yeah, thanks for coming and sharing, and we'll follow up with interest. And anyone who is interested in kind of the cross-cutting aspect, join the mailing list and follow the proposal. All right, Wilfred.
Thanks all.
I think you are up
Thank
next.
you.
Yes. So this is about a pull request to modify the image review webhook interface. And I think Jordan and Tim are currently as reviewers on here. So the background here is that we're using it for doing authorization based on policies for pod creation. And at the moment, it can only basically say, yes, it's allowed, or no, it's not allowed, and here's a string that explains why not. And we'd like to transfer a little bit more information to give something like a warning, like, yes, it's allowed, but this should really be replaced because there may be a known vulnerability in the image. Like, you don't want to break the pod creation, but you want to send a signal like, you should do something here. And it does already have a little bit of that because the admission controller actually already does create annotations that signal that there was a fail open because the webhook couldn't be reached at the pod deployment time. So the webhook, the pull request really introduces the possibility for the image review webhook backend to send back a set of annotations that the plugin will then add to the pod spec, so that you can signal things like, hey, this should be reviewed for one reason or another.
Yeah, so I think the question in the PR was whether annotations on a pod are a safe way to transfer that information. So right now the annotation is failed open. So as far as I could tell, the only use of an annotation was for a case where we weren't asserting that the thing was safe, right? If you kind of flip that and start trying to use annotations to transfer details about, like, this thing needs review, or something that another part of the system is going to depend on in order for you to consider the integrity of the system intact, that raises questions about who can change these annotations. What happens if the annotation flag that says this needs review gets erased? Like today, we don't have that issue because we're not using annotations for that. But as soon as you start using them for that, you have to consider like chain of trust as far as anything downstream that could modify the annotation. So that seemed a little suspect.
So just to be very clear here, I don't think this is a method for declaring something like, let me restart. There's two purposes here. One is to put something in the audit log, just so that it's like retrievable later. The second one is just to have like an informational record. Like in the end, what you want to do is, and that's something we're also working on, to do a regular audit of everything that is or was deployed and have a separate system that gives a clear audit record. So this is more as an intermediate system where you say, okay, it's not something you can rely on, like the existence or non-existence of the annotations shouldn't make you feel safe or less safe, and that actually is the same with the fail open at the moment. Like it could be removed. It's not a good signal, I think, at the moment for the operator to assure that, yes, the check was actually done, because it might not have been in case of fail open. It's more yes, it's a convenient measure to like operate on your system. And like somebody else at some point suggested a label that may be an alternate way that achieves the same thing. But I think this is more before we have the full system to have at least some reasonable way to get some indication back to both the audit log, but also to the user that just wants to look at pods that are running to get some, although not secure channel for that.
Yeah, I think when the producer, which in this case is the webhook, and the consumer, which is some system we don't know, are both outside of our control, making the statement that this is not a secure channel and you can't trust these to persist or be monkeyed with, like that's easy for us to do, but that assumption doesn't always make it out to the edges. And so I don't know how we keep the things producing these and the things consuming these from acting as though they are secure. We've seen that in other things in the API as well, right? Like events. Events are not a reliable message bus, and they get deduplicated and they get discarded frequently, and yet people often will try to build integrations on top of them, assuming that they will always be delivered and they will always be accurate. And then they get surprised and open bugs when events don't meet those expectations. So have we considered how we, if we add this, how we prevent or communicate well that this isn't to be used as a secure channel?
I think the communication here would be that, yes, these annotations are not protected against modification, so therefore they should not be relied on as clear signals, or they should not be relied on as the absence of an annotation should not be relied on as a guarantee of any security property. And that, as I said, that is the same as currently with failopen, where it's actually not properly communicated.
Other people have thoughts about this? I know, Tim, you were on there as well.
Yeah, my suggestion was that maybe these annotations should be audit annotations instead of pod annotations. That I think addresses the first use case of just kind of, surfacing this information in the audit log. It doesn't really address the use case of grabbing everything in the cluster and seeing what needs to be audited at a later date. Although you could hopefully pull that out of the audit log itself.
Yeah.
It does make me nervous kind of checking in an annotation into the API right now, because we are sort of very anti-annotation at the moment for official APIs. And having this actually checked in makes it an official API.
So I'm happy to just move this to the audit log. I think for most of what we want to do, that's actually quite sufficient, because that leaves a record somewhere, and I think that's the first thing that we could achieve. And for the second portion, maybe a label is the better one, because that then actually makes the selection easier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, adding things to the audit events, I don't think would be controversial at all. That seems very reasonable.
Is there a channel for that, or like I haven't looked in detail in that yet? Like, what is the channel from the admission plugin to the audit?
The admission attributes now have audit annotations.
Oh, okay.
That you can call on them.
Okay.
That just happened in the last release, I think.
Oh, okay. So that because like most of this was done before the last release. So okay, that may explain that. So that's a change I'm perfectly happy with.
All right. Well, let's start there, and if we want to explore further modifications to the pod, we can kind of take that as a second follow-up.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. Okay. Happy with that. So are Tim and Jordan still the right reviewers for this?
Yeah. That's fine.
Okay, sounds good. And so the goal on my side ideally would be to get this into this release. So I'll try to like make the changes ASAP and then ping it.
Yeah, I think the things contributing to audit annotations have already been done. There are a few admission plugins that do that, so that shouldn't be too difficult to get in the next few days.
Okay, sounds good. Perfect.
All right, Patrick, you're up.
Yep, so I got 2 PRs up. Tim suggested we break into the API and the implementation. So the first one we're looking at right now is, I believe that's the 47. Check that. That's the API one. Yeah, so this is just the API for the dynamic audit pieces. Some of the API machinery guys had some input on that, so I just altered it today. Originally I put it within the audit.k8.io API. There was an issue with now we're kind of exposing those types, the events and policy types, which aren't technically REST types or serve types within the scheme. So Stefan was recommending we break, because this is a serve type, break this out into its own API. So I just broke it out into a separate API called auditconfiguration.k8.io and made it an audit sync type. So it's just completely separated from the current audit API. Hopefully that works out for everyone. It is kind of an interesting question right there, as far as having an API where you may want a known type in the scheme, so you can encode it and decode it, like maybe you're taking it from command line flags or whatever, but you may not necessarily be serving those types. So
yeah, we've traditionally broken things into config packages, but I think the audit stuff might have predated that. So once again, we're discovering distinctions 2 releases after some on-disk API group got shipped. So I'm sorry you have to be the one to discover that.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, that makes a little more sense then. So no worries, but I just split it out. Is everybody okay with that being split into its own API? Is that cool?
I actually hadn't gotten to see it yet, but if that's what we need to do, that may be the cleanest way. We'll see when we go through the PR.
Cool. Yeah, I think it is a little cleaner. I mean, you do have 2 APIs is the only downside, but it does make things a little cleaner. It keeps us, more confident that as we go into GA with the advanced auditing stuff, we are completely out of the way of that. So I think all in all, maybe a good thing.
Okay.
But yeah, we need to get that PR merged first, and then the other PR is kind of hinging on what happens in this one. The other PR is just kind of the implementation as far as the actual audit backends and what they're doing, and linking that all up.
Okay. And were the API machinery folks involved in kind of seeing what had to change in the audit pipeline to accommodate that?
I don't know if they looked too much through the audit pipeline. I did present that several times, so I know they've seen it.
Okay.
No one really had much to say about it, though.
All right. That either means it's awesome or everybody is swamped and hasn't gotten to it yet.
I'm hoping not the latter, but we'll see.
Yeah. Oh. Okay.
How did you handle the policy in the new group?
So the policy is just being imported from V1
Okay.
of the current. Does that make sense? I figured to use the most stable there.
Like you're pulling policy from the other API group?
Yeah. Yep.
If it's not I guess it's not a top level type, so it doesn't matter that it's not registered. Is that right?
I believe so. Yeah, I still need to get all the test passing to see that definitely, but I believe that's the case.
It might make sense to move that into configuration eventually, but not at this stage.
Okay, yeah, that'd be fun.
All right, Tim, were there other audit-related things wrapping up that you wanted to mention? I'm trying to think through the things I saw come in.
I think there is a PR open for, let's see, we're removing basic audit logging, which is really just advanced auditing going to GA, dynamic auditing. Did the webhook audit annotations get merged? Looks like maybe it did.
I can't remember.
But yeah.
This is the ability for webhooks to return annotations that would get folded into the audit events.
Right.
Yep. I'm not sure if it merged or not. I know it was close. Anyway, oh, and audit got promoted to V1, the event API. So as of 1.12, things that consume audit events will have a GA API to consume, which is great.
Yep.
Okay. Were there other things people wanted to mention? We've got about 10 minutes left. If not, we can wrap up and give you back 10 minutes. Anything before we go? Going once, twice. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It was a good discussion, and we'll wrap up the release and see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks for having us, everybody. Take care.